gents, welcome back, and I'm very sorry it's taken so long for us to get this video out. We've been kind of packed. SEMA's coming up pretty soon. We're trying to get a couple things. We got a new orange car behind us that's been giving us a real pain. Anyway, we're trying to get things wrapped up, and on this episode we finally get the differential on our 350Z drift build finally completed. I swear, no more differential videos from here on out. But all in all, given the condition it was when we received it, we thought it was a lost cause. But it actually cleaned up really well. Threw a new coat of paint on it, as you guys just saw. Cleaned out all the grease, replaced all the seals, put some new gasket on it, and the thing looks beautiful. And we installed a nice little Easter egg for anyone who probably gets this car in the future. That special little yeet plate, that's what's gonna make this car that much better. Anyway, without further ado, here is the episode. Oh, wait, I forgot. One more thing. My boss says I need to tell you guys to subscribe, like the video, and hit the bell tone so you keep up with all of our episodes. Otherwise, I gotta get a real job soon. So I appreciate the help. Here we go. Now that we've added about 20 pounds of rotational mass to this, I think we're going to be good. Okay, so I just want to do a little bit of preparation before we put the diff back in the car. One of the worst parts about welding a diff is the slag, right? You saw in the video I had some of my leathers wrapped over the bearings because I didn't feel like messing with removing them, and trying to cover as many surfaces as I can that if they got slag on would be a bad thing. So any of these things, and the worst part about it, as you can see, some of this stuff is just kind of falling off. If this stuff falls off and you don't have like a magnetic drain plug in the diff, it's going to just kind of float around. So it could eventually cause some damage. So just take the time to kind of scrape and hit some of these bigger pieces of slag to see if they come off. A lot of them, especially if you've cleaned it with brake cleaner and in the dunk tank like we have, a lot of them will stick on there pretty well and they'll be pretty much harmless. But for the most part, just try and get as many of them off. Any of the rotating surfaces, our mating surface for our ring gear is very important that we don't get any little tiny pieces of slag stuck under there. For the most part, even if it was, it'd probably crush them, but just do your best to try and avoid it. So we did a pretty good job on this one. So just a little bit of scrapes here and there should be more than enough. I don't know if you can see that piece sitting right there. Now, I assume when you put the actual shaft back in the differential, you'll probably pound it right out anyway. That's probably, yeah, you can see it right there, that little shiny piece. Right there, right below my finger. So just make sure you check down in the splines to make sure that there's no large pieces. Try and bang them out if you can. Now I've heard of some people, and this is kind of a good idea, some people put grease in certain parts of the differentials that they don't want slag to actually stick to. However, when you're getting it as hot as I did, a lot of that grease will start to smoke and eventually just dissipate, and you're probably gonna get something stuck there anyway. So sticking like a piece of leather, something that's non-flammable in areas is probably, that's what I kind of prefer. I think she's good. I assume this is the top view from what it looks like. The high quality printer they use this bad boy on. Yep. All right, so we're looking at the top of the differential, and it looks like our shallow piece or shallow bushing goes on the bottom in here, and our large piece goes on the top. Yeah, so they wanted us to use threaded rod and those washers, so we pretty much have those ready to go.
The instructions don't necessarily say for this exact bushing to use lubricant, but in previous instructions it does say to use this grease whenever metal touches these polyurethane bushings. So I mean, because of these giant washers, I doubt there's going to be a large chance for them to fall out on their own. So I'm going to be on the safe side and just install a bunch of grease. So that guy pretty much pressed right in. Maybe that's a hint that I might be using too much grease, but I'm barely scratching the surface of this tub so far. And I do think that ordering the black was a good idea, but I think there might have been a missed opportunity on the red ones. Would have looked really sweet. We've gained a couple horsepower using the red ones. Yeah, those things just fit right in. No tool needed, except for me. All right, so we got a pin we got to insert, which we'll probably need some type of clamping mechanism for, but we'll find out. We'll see here. Oh, nope. Goes right in. Try not to get stuff everywhere. This one is fighting me a little bit more. Okay. Okay. There we go. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and clean up some of the excess. This stuff is really sticky, but brake cleaner does a really good job of just getting rid of a lot of it, lifting it off whatever surface it's on. So we'll clean them up real quick, and then we'll get started by loading the diff in the differential housing. It was actually a lot more difficult for some reason to find a set of rear diff output shaft seals than it should have been, if you ask me. So, but we got some that were very similar, and for really the limited number of miles this car is going to be driven, I think this is going to work just fine. So the difference about, well, something interesting about this rear diff versus others that I've seen, there's no shoulder for this actual seal to sit up against. So you can pound this seal right through the entire housing. So it's going to be important when you install this that you actually just take a mental note of what, like the offset at which you're going to install the seal without going too far and having it fall into the differential. Now, this seal is also a little bit skinnier, a little bit thinner than the factory one. So I'm going to actually mount it as flush as I can with this inner shoulder. That way it still rides on the outside, or the best appropriate spot for the CV shaft. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But for now, I just lubed up the outside a little bit, just to give it a little bit of ease. Now, I don't normally use this type of lubricant because it's a little bit too much, but it should dry over time and not be a big problem. Oh well. All right. Moving on to the next one. Okay, now this is where the important part of labeling all of the components of the differential from the right side to the left side come back into play. Now we're going to start by putting our ring gear back on, torque those down, and then we're going to begin putting our outer races on and positioning the diff into place. It might take a little bit of movement from the pinion gear, but for the most part it should fit in relatively easy. There we go. So the torque specifications for our ring gear here are 58 foot-pounds of torque with 32 to 38 degrees additionally after that. So I don't have a protractor with me, so I'm just gonna kind of guess on those degrees, but we'll get it started with this guy and we'll torque it down here in a moment. We put together our little fancy contraption here in order to properly torque these guys down. So again, 58 foot-pounds of torque, and then after that we got 31 to 36 degrees. We'll be torquing in our star pattern here. All right, so we're going to attempt to do 35 degrees. All we gotta do is just do one final little cleaning and be able to throw it back in the diff. So I'm gonna throw a little bit of oil into some of these roller bearings before we begin our final assembly. I'm going to attempt to load this guy into the diff housing with all of these spacers in place and also not pinching my fingers. So here we go. First try. Okay, we're getting there. All right, I think we're actually good to layer back down. All right, we are pretty much aligned. Cool, all right. Now, for our caps. We have a right and our left. And we have a beveled side and we have a flat side. We're going to want to make sure the beveled edge goes towards the outside of our diff. And we're going to torque them down to 69 foot-pounds. Okay, torqued. And that actually feels really good. Very good. We did a lot of welding and we put a lot of heat into those ring gears. So I hope that this thing does not become exponentially harder to install than they came out. But the good news is that they were actually very difficult to get out. So I don't expect them to go in super easy. And if they do, then that's good for us. She is all the way in now. Looks good. So we're going to clean this surface really well. Want to just make sure that there's no oils. And we have the right stuff, which the first time I heard about that, someone was telling me I had a problem. I was leaking out of a gasket that was made. And the technician was like, it's because you're not using the right stuff. And I was like, no, dude, I used the right stuff. You know, it called for this and this. He was like, no, I don't mean like you use something wrong. I mean like you need the right stuff, like the brand name. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? So, finally found out that day that there is indeed a gasket maker called The Right Stuff. Right here. And ever since that day, I mean, it's true, I love this stuff. So it is kind of pricey though. However, I think it's worth it. I'm not going to skimp on some gasket maker and potentially have a leak somewhere and then have to jack the car back up and get to it. It's just not worth saving the dollars. I'd rather just get it done the right time and know it's going to last for as long as I need to. So, had a lot of good luck with this stuff. 1 minute gasket. You can go ahead and throw lubricant in it really quickly as soon as you get the diff installed. So, let me just clean this up really well. Both my, well, where'd my cover go? Oh, I moved over here. Both surfaces that are mating. Now on this, we're going to want to make sure we go around the inside of our bolt holes. You know, we could do inside and outside, but I usually just do the inside of the bolt holes, as well as just drop a little bit of the inside of our hole. That's just to prevent any oil from leaking through the threads or through the outside of the cover. So if you just take your time and do this right the first time, you'll never have to worry about having a leaky oil spot in your driveway or whatnot. And you're only looking for a small, nice bead. Hell, they ain't never gonna take my job. No robot can do this. Okay, now it's okay no matter how ugly of a job you do. We can use our finger and just kind of go over it. So we will press this down just a little bit and we'll call that pretty much done. And over time that'll probably expand a little bit. All right, so now there's a bunch of different techniques for this. Generally it doesn't really matter. However, you can get a decent bead down, will work just fine. You can move left to right, you can do little circular motions. It doesn't really matter. There we go. All right, so there's a couple different ways and methods I've seen this done when it comes to actually mounting the pan or oil pan, rear diff cover, whatever it is. Two major methods where you tighten it down only like finger tight. First you wait, I don't know, 5 minutes or so, and you tighten it the rest of the way afterwards. I'm going to put it on finger tight and tighten it the rest of the way after about another 2 minutes. And I feel like that's, in my experience, I've had the best luck using that method. All right, now we have another bracket that we're going to be adding to the rear subframe to give us just a little bit more support. On the old R200s, they had mounting points on both the left and the right. On the new ones, this is not technically an R200, but it is very similar. However, it only has one mount on the left. So we picked up another rear diff mount to go on the right side. That should give us a little bit more rigidity. And hopefully that in turn makes it more reliable and it doesn't blow up this diff. All right, like I said before, we're gonna finger tighten it just for a bit. Let it sit for a minute, and then we're gonna tighten it down the rest of the way. All right. And that concludes the work on this rear diff. All right, so next, well, first of all, to address this is way too heavy for one person to install. Well, even really, yeah, way too heavy for one person to install by themselves, especially if you're gonna keep this vent, this breather back here. So went ahead and installed this guy. We had a little bit of difficulty getting all three of them in at the same time. You always have to, of course, start with our rear post. We were able to get our front right ear bolt in, but our front left didn't go in without a little bit of pressure and some, some persuasion. So now that we have all three bolts basically finger tight, we're gonna go ahead and torque them down to 81 foot-pounds. And there it is. All right, now to move on to one of our performance parts that, again, I'm really fond of. I like the idea of the rear diff having two rear posts, especially for an activity like drifting. I mean, this thing's gonna be taking a lot of abuse as far as locking up the rear brakes, clutch kicking it, and who knows, maybe even burning this thing through a berm or something like that. So the stiffer this thing is, the better. So Bell makes a really awesome product. It looks like it's again, like I said earlier, it looks like it was cut out with a laser table. Really nice welds, really nice, what seems to be powder coat finish. And it's pretty straightforward to install. You don't really need anything else. So really, if you didn't want to go to the trouble of installing all of these bushings, you probably could get away with just this single bracket. This is going to be the hole that this metal bushing and our longer bolt are going to go through. The metal bushing is the exact size as the hole, and the purpose of this is when you torque it down, it won't crush this subframe. So make sure you get it installed. So we'll start by taking our long bolt and our washer and putting it through the top section of our brace. We're going to put our bushing in place as well. And on the other side, we have another washer and a nylock nut. So when we slide this guy in, it'll sit just like that, and there's barely enough room for you to squeeze your hand in place to put the washer and the nylock nut. Next, we have our two longer differential cover bolts. Look at that. Now, there's a lot to be said in the manufacturing process of getting one bracket to fit many different variations and little imperfections of manufacturing, but this thing fits beautifully. It was just done so well. So I think that's two things. One, they did a really good job working with the tolerances of this Bell bracket, and two, I think our new bushings really set our rear diff exactly where it should be from the factory. So let's go ahead and torque these things down. Wow, look at that. Just the right length. All right, there we go. Now all I'm going to do to finish this is we're going to put some oil in it and reinstall our speed sensors. All right, both of those are good and tight. Now, before we forget, let's go ahead and put some fluid in it, and we'll be done with this project. Well, I think there we are. Okay, so we are now, yeah, it looks like a little bit less than 2 quarts would do it. All right, now our rear diff is officially done. can move on to bigger and better things. Now, ideally we'd work on this rear end a little more. I think we still got a lot of work to do as far as pushing bushings out. We have the front control arms that are pretty much ready to go back in the car. And for the sake of saving space and kind of cleaning up our shop here, we're gonna throw those in just to get them out of the way and maybe regroup and think about what we're gonna do next. So let's do that.